Hello, I'm going to tell you about the reasons for my separation from my husband. This event with my neighbor's son pushed me to open a new chapter in my life. I remember the moment I first met Mark. We were in college, and those were the most vibrant, exciting years of my life. The excitement of that time reflected in the sparkle in my eyes and the enthusiasm in my words, and Mark was like a mirror that reflected this energy back to me. For 3 years, we were side by side. After those years, which I believed everything was in our favor, we took the step to get married, thinking it was the right move for both of us. This step felt like the beginning of a path that would lead me to my dreams. Since Mark's family was financially well off, they opened an office for us after we graduated, and we managed to get good references together. However, the fact that we didn't have children seemed to make me lose interest in work. I was no longer going to the office. I was spending time at home, becoming somewhat of an antisocial person. As the years went by, a dull picture began to form for us. I dreamed of having children. I always thought a child would complete our family. With every attempt, I would hope in vain, and with every disappointment, I became more withdrawn. Mark was always supportive in this matter, but at some point, I began to feel a lack of understanding regarding how difficult it was for me. Every conversation ended with the same attitude. Maybe one day, Olivia, we must be patient. His calmness deepened the void within me. I felt alone. Mark frequently returned home late, yet I never suspected anything about him. I probably thought that if there were another woman in my place, she would think he was cheating. But Mark's distance and coldness made me think that perhaps he was trying to distance himself from me. These thoughts gnawed at my mind. Then, that summer, our neighbor's son Ethan came over. His youth and excitement awakened something within me that I had long forgotten and lost in my own world. At first, it was just casual conversations and smiles, but as the days went by, this interaction began to transform into something more. I looked forward to running into him on the balcony every day. Even in those moments, I felt guilty. But no matter how much I tried to resist, the desire to connect with him consumed me. Ethan was well built, handsome, and also very kind. A pull had formed between us that I couldn't name. I watched him from the balcony, and when he went to the backyard, I would find an excuse to go outside. It felt like I was finding in him what I couldn't in Mark, but I had felt such things when Mark and I first met. Am I falling in love? I asked myself, but I couldn't provide a rational answer. However, there was something different about Ethan. His possessive nature felt like the only remedy for my loneliness. I felt as though I was trapping myself, but I wasn't blaming myself entirely for this situation. Mark's distance was bringing me closer to Ethan. I decided to let things happen. When Ethan went to the backyard, I would go out too, and I would always look for him from the balcony. But it wasn't a one sided interest. Ethan was also very attentive and kind to me. Spending time with Ethan felt like therapy, but Mark had no idea about it. He seemed oblivious to the change in me. One evening, when Mark came home late from work, I found myself unable to control my feelings any longer. The emptiness inside me, the coldness from Mark that I felt beside me, was pushing me closer to Ethan. That night, when our eyes met in the darkness of the garden, it felt like we had silently agreed on something. I wanted to experience, again, the feelings that Mark had made me forget. There was a bond between us that transcended words, and Mark still hadn't come home. I made up an excuse to go outside and poured myself a cup of coffee before stepping onto the balcony. My eyes were searching for Ethan. There was a stillness in their house. It felt like no one was home. Then I saw him. He was coming down the stairs from the terrace to the backyard. I wanted to get up right away, but I hesitated. I wanted to go to the yard, but I thought, what if his mom is aware of this situation since we had been spending too much time together? I felt like I was overstepping the line, and this realization made me nervous. I sat for a little longer, telling myself that if I stayed a bit longer, I wouldn't draw attention to myself, but I was determined to go see Ethan soon. Just as I finished my coffee and was about to get up, I saw Ethan coming down the stairs, and I was even more resolved to get up. He looked at me just as he was about to enter the house, and it felt like he was asking, "Why didn't you come?" That look made me think he had been waiting for me too. As I tried to process what was happening, I saw Ethan going back to the backyard and decided to gather my courage and go down. Ethan's sister had gone into labor, so his mom had left to help her. Ethan was here to take care of the animals. I thought his relaxed demeanor showed that he was comfortable being here. I quickly walked to the door leading to the backyard. I felt a strange sensation within me. I felt odd, but also eager to see Ethan. When I reached him, he was waiting by the shed in the corner of the yard. For a moment, I felt like a high school crush, and it was clear we were both past those years. We had unspoken desires between us. Without uttering a word, I wanted to hug him. When I approached him, I must have made it very obvious because he hugged me. It was such a warm and tight embrace that I let myself go. It was an unforgettable night, and for a moment I felt like I hadn't experienced any of the hardships in my life. After that moment, contradictions began to emerge within me. On one hand, I felt guilty, while on the other hand, every encounter with Ethan intensified the fire within me. My anger toward Mark grew, and as I couldn't bridge the emotional chasm between us, I found myself getting angry with myself too. But I couldn't escape the realization of how deeply this emptiness was pulling me into darkness. I questioned my own mistakes and the shortcomings of my marriage every day. The moments when I felt Mark wasn't beside me only brought me closer to Ethan. However, after a while, I realized I needed to distance myself from Ethan because I wanted to repair this relationship. This wasn't who I was. Even though the idea of experiencing these things while being married to Mark excited me at first, it later turned into regret. Unfortunately, every effort I made seemed to be in vain. The distance between Mark and me became more pronounced. The situation I was in made me forget even the topic of children. We couldn't build a family together, yet what I couldn't express was that I felt like a stranger in this marriage. We were living together like two strangers in the house, not like a couple. I realized this situation wouldn't last long, and finally, during one dinner, I confessed that continuing this relationship would harm both of us. My heart was racing with fear, but as the tears rolled down my cheeks, I understood how weak I truly was. Mark responded very coldly to my confession. After a moment of silence, he asked why I felt so lonely. At that moment, I realized it would be very difficult to explain our situation because I was still in love with Mark, but I was too weak to reveal the wounds I had opened. I found myself afraid of hurting him. That evening, the emptiness inside me grew larger. No one could fill that void. In that moment, even though I still harbored love for Mark, I was terrified of losing him. For a moment, I felt like I had lost his warmth. I realized I had lost something that would never return. The night was filled with my tears. I felt like the emptiness beside Mark was closing in on me at the door opening to Ethan, but that door was slowly closing too. That night, the wounds in my marriage deepened further. Mark chose to retreat into his own loneliness instead of trying to resolve things. Meanwhile, I only wanted to keep my love for him alive, but I realized it was too late. I felt as lonely as a desert, and as this emptiness deepened, sometimes my emotions would spiral out of control, while at other times it seemed like nothing would fill the void in that moment. As I struggled to get through the night, I felt like my soul existed somewhere outside my body. I was stuck between two paths, but I didn't want anyone beside me, either Mark or Ethan, yet at the same time I felt like I was lost in a dream I didn't recognize myself in.